Yes, I think the only solution for this problem in the long run is to offer Ukraine EU membership. This will give Ukraine a chance to say, okay, maybe we will not aspire to be a NATO member, because this is something NATO cannot actually do, because this will mean a confrontation with Russia. No one wants that.
Okay, let's bring Thomas Wiegel to. What do you make about that situation?
I think they should bring fucking. I think that they should do a power move and fast track Ukraine into being a fucking NATO member and put them in the fucking EU. All right? I think they should go double whammy against that motherfucker. Fuck Putin. All right? Okay, so we're gonna watch a quick, I say quick, not very quick. It's a 30-minute video, but we'll speed it up a little bit. Video on the situation in Ukraine and Russia. I did a segment on this like a week or two ago, and it's up on the YouTube if you want to see like a full holistic take on the beginnings of this situation. But if you want like a baby introduction or a baby introduction to the situation, this is what happens. All right. Ukraine wants to join NATO, and they basically were formed as a bulwark against Soviet Russia because there were all these satellite states that were right along the edge of the Western European countries, and they wanted some protection. So the US and England and France and West Germany and all of these states in Western Europe joined NATO, right? In order to say, like, if Russia invades any of us, all of us are going to go and invade Soviet Russia. And 3 of these countries were nuclear superpowers during this time, right? So it was a pretty good standoff. Like Russia couldn't invade and increase their like imperialistic fucking cringe shit that they were doing. So NATO is a good thing. And Ukraine, in 2014, or in the years preceding up to 2014, was seriously considering joining NATO, right? Which is fine. They should be able to do that if they want to. Countries should be able to do things that are in their best interest without outside interference or fear of being invaded by some foreign entity, right? Unfortunately, Russia doesn't play by those same fucking rules. Russia just fucking straight up invaded Ukraine. They invaded Ukraine and took over Crimea, which is super fucking cringe. And they, they basically said, well, yeah, of course we invaded Ukraine. It's we invaded Ukraine because they had attacked us first. But the people in Crimea, they voted to be part of Russia. So that's why Crimea is part of Russia now, right? Because they democratically elected to leave Ukraine and join Russia, which is not true. Just like every election in Russia right now, all the elections are purely fucking symbolic, and it's always just whatever is in the best interest of Putin and his fucking crony fucking oligopoly that he has running. Putin is not a good dude. He's a fucking piece of shit. Mega, like, I would say near fascist, if not a fascist, who is constantly praised by the guy that is like the premier Nosbol, Dugin. I can't remember his first name. Alexei Dugin, maybe, but yeah, like he's pretty widely hailed as a great dude by fascists all over the fucking place. It's really weird, right? And that's the situation as of like 2014. Well, earlier this month or last month, Russia started doing some kind of sketchy shit when it comes to Ukraine once again, because Ukraine still wants to they still want to jump into NATO. Guess what happens? Russia puts 100,000 troops on their border. Oh no, that's just like formality. We're trying to make sure that people don't come into our country illegally. 100,000 troops on your border when you already have people in Crimea with fucking long-range missiles. You have to have tanks to fight off fucking Ukrainian refugees. Yeah, I don't fucking think so. And neither does anybody else. Sondsol, you have a very normie definition of socialism, by the way. Absolutely not. A normie definition of socialism would be worker ownership of the means of production. That is a normie definition of socialism, okay? Mine is a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more accurate than that, but, you know, wasn't it 150K? Well, maybe they've increased their troop presence there, which is what we're about to find out, because I haven't kept up with it super hard, but let's watch this and let's see.
High on the border between Ukraine and Russia. US President Joe Biden and Russian leader Vladimir Putin met for a video conference, but little, if any, progress was made. And the mood between the two sides remains acrimonious. Russia has an estimated 100,000 troops massed on the border. Vladimir Putin appears to be saying that he wants far-reaching strategic and security guarantees concerning Ukraine or else. So, on to the point we ask, Russia's troop build-up, will the West stand by Ukraine against Putin?
Hopefully.
Well, thanks very much indeed for joining us here on the show. And my guests here in the studio include journalist and author Gesine Dornblut, an expert on Russia and the post-Soviet world. Gesine points out that Putin has already shifted the focus of the debate. It's not at all a looming war, but a war that has been going on for nearly 8 years. Also with us is the military expert and blogger Thomas Wiegold. He says, even without actual military action, Putin again demonstrates how he can provoke serious disruption in the NATO alliance.
This music is so fucking intense. Holy shit. Does anybody else hear this shit? This shit's so fucking intense. It sounds like battle music from fucking Mass Effect or something.
And a very warm welcome to Roman Goncharenko, Ukraine expert from Deutsche Welle's Eastern Europe desk in Bonn. And Roman argues that Russia is not going to start open warfare with Ukraine, at least not anytime soon. The West should therefore adopt a hybrid approach and offer Ukraine a real EU perspective. Interesting stuff, plenty to talk about. Let's get going with Gesine first. I think the media in the West are full of it. They're saying that there's very credible evidence that Russia has, as we've heard, this huge army massed on the border, 100,000 forces, we're told. The big question is why?
I think it's the aim is to threaten and to shift the focus of the debate from the fact that we already have a war ongoing. We have a puppet regime in the so-called the region in Donbass. Yeah. And it's another aim is to bring Joe Biden, US president, to the table and just to bring more attention to the problem.
You say to bring more attention to the problem. How serious is the problem? I mean, you know, Berlin's Tagesspiegel newspaper is typical for many in the West, the views that are being stated. It is saying we are staring into an abyss. That sounds pretty serious this time round.
Well, it's not seriously more troops than it has been in April. And I think that a new escalation is not so likely, although you can't exclude it. But I think in difference to Crimea, you should ask why Russia should escalate and why should Russia invade into Ukraine. And I think that this high emotional factor we had around the peninsula of Crimea, it simply does not exist. And also, it's not a matter of popularity of Putin by another war and maybe a victory, but the aim is just to destabilize Ukraine.
Okay, let's hear what Roman Goncharenko in Bonn has to say. I know that you keep your finger on the pulse of developments in your home country, Ukraine, the country where you were born. So what is the Ukrainian perspective here? Is this a moment of truth?
Well, first of all, of course, it could be a moment of truth, but at the moment, I think fears of an all-out war between Russia and Ukraine are somehow not realistic. Because I think Putin's point is to start talking with the West about what should become of Ukraine. Should Ukraine become integrated with NATO or not? Because we had this promise at the NATO summit in Bucharest in 2008, when NATO said Ukraine and Georgia would one day become NATO members. And since then, nothing happened. We have no date, but Putin is trying to prevent that. And this is what he wants to talk about with Biden and with all maybe most important Western countries like Germany or UK. So this is what he's trying to achieve now. In the short term, I think he's trying to incorporate Ukraine again into a new Russian empire that he's trying to build.
Yes.
And at the moment, I think...
It seems to me, and from things that I've read, that Putin wants to get back to not exactly the Soviet Union, but he wants to get back to like Soviet era prominence in the world, and he wants to pull in all these satellite states. You can see his him trying to pull a lot of weight in Belarus when oh shit, what's his name? The guy there that is the last dictator of Europe. When he Lukashenko, when he almost got ousted, Putin had to step in and try and protect him, right? So it does seem like he's trying to pull in a bunch of ex-Soviet satellite states and try and get them all under the Russian banner once again. Not because he's a communist in secret and he's actually super based Marxist-Leninist, but just because, you know, he wants more power, right?
We should start thinking how we can prevent that. And this is what my idea is. If we start to think about what will come in 1, 2, 3, or 5 years, the problem will not disappear. So if the West thinks we can sit and just say that we support Ukraine, but Ukraine will not be integrated into Western structures, then we will still have a problem, because Ukrainians do not want to be integrated into the Russian Empire, whatever it is called. So the West should think about how to help Ukraine and how to solve this problem in the long run.
So
the only solution
what's the
is
recommendation?
EU membership. This is my idea.
Repeat for us, Roman?
Yes, I think the only solution for this problem in the long run is to offer Ukraine EU membership. This will give Ukraine a chance to say, okay, maybe we will not aspire to be a NATO member, because this is something NATO cannot actually do, because this will mean a confrontation with Russia. No one wants that.
Okay, let's bring Thomas Wiegel to. What do you make about that, Sigurd?
I think they should bring fucking. I think that they should do a power move and fast track Ukraine into being a fucking NATO member and put them in the fucking EU. All right. I think they should go double whammy against that motherfucker. Fuck Putin. All right. This dude is like unironically evil. Anyone that disagrees with him, guess what? That motherfucker gonna be fucking poisoned to death. That's a Putin move. All right. Poison them with fucking what is it? Some kind of radioactive isotope. Absolutely fucking disgusting shit. All right. But it's totally fine because it's Russia. And like he has enough plausible deniability to say, no, I didn't do it. He just happened to find this incredibly rare radioactive isotope and, you know, consume it at enough of a level to make him fucking die almost without immediate medical care. So I don't know. I think that they should absolutely do a power move and put the pressure on Russia, since Russia seems to be more than willing to put the pressure on Western nations in terms of their democracies, you know?
That proposal that Roman has just made?
Well, I think it doesn't solve the problem. On the one hand, of course, Russia is testing NATO's resolve. That's quite obviously, and NATO is much more prepared to deal with that on its northern flank than on the southeastern flank. As to Roman's proposal to bring Ukraine into the EU umbrella, we shouldn't forget that the EU as such also has a mutual defense clause, which in itself is even stronger than the NATO defense clause.
Oh, well, then, yeah,
it hasn't really been invoked so far. France did invoke it once after the Bataclan terrorist attacks, but only to respond, and that's one reason why German soldiers are in Mali in Africa. But it hasn't been tested, and I think to offer an EU perspective without all the other problems solved wouldn't change much.
It is widely said that that Vladimir Putin is at the moment trying to test the mettle of the US President Joe Biden. Is that how you see it?
Not only of the US, but also of NATO as a whole. There's really a problem for NATO. They have no real unified response so far to what's going on there. We have to remember the promise of a NATO membership for Ukraine in 2008 was under US pressure. It wasn't the wish of Germany, it wasn't the wish of France, and that's why the offer stands, but nobody knows when it will be fulfilled.
Well, I have to add, it was the wish of Poland, it was the wish of the Baltic states, so it is not like it was just on the wish of the US president. I see it differently. And if you ask Eastern European countries now, they would support such a move. But I'm not advocating EU NATO membership for Ukraine now. What I'm advocating is that we think strategically and we look into the future 5 or 10 years ahead. And there is no way Ukraine problem is going to disappear. This is wrong if the West thinks that it will just be a buffer zone between Russia and the West and we can all be happy. This will not work. Ukrainians have proved that.
Gesine, a quick word about all that?
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. And I mean, we have to think what's the basic problem. And the problem is that Ukrainians are afraid of Russia, and that's for good reasons. And what happens now at the border just proves that they have good reason to fear.
Check out all of the fucking Twitter accounts that have been talking about, like, if you want to invade Ukraine, that's only because you love war and you want to fucking send people off to their death. Why don't you go there and volunteer for their army and fight against Russia yourself if you care so much? It's like, this is like the, oh, you don't, if you want to eat, why don't you farm your own food type argument? It's incredibly fucking stupid because guess what? People that sign up to be in the military, they know that they're signing up to be in the military where they might go to fucking war, right? And the reason we go to war is either to protect our interests abroad or to protect our interests at home. And when these motherfuckers are invading people with impunity and gaining more power and simultaneously using that power to try and destabilize our nation, speaking of Russia, yeah, absolutely. We should do something to try and combat that 1,000,000%. It's not just a warmongering opinion. It's an opinion that is based in these people are actively trying to attack us. Whether it's like through espionage, whether it's through trying to change public perception through misinformation or, trying to stir up controversy in the United States or other Western nations. Yeah, they're absolutely waging a different kind of war against us. And if they're going to try and go at us or if they're going to try and increase their power by attacking one of our allies, then yeah, we should 1,000,000% try and defend our interests, right?
Yeah, Russia.
Well, what we have seen is another meeting between Presidents Putin and Biden. It didn't seem to have achieved too much, but it did give us a feel for the level of mutual dislike between these two old adversaries, these two old enemies.
President Putin has achieved one thing: personal contact with U.S. President Biden.
Good to see you again.
Putin wants to be taken seriously. The recent escalation on the border to Ukraine is a test for the U.S.'s new administration. The two already met once in Geneva in June to test the waters. The atmosphere back then was surprisingly relaxed. But for the matter at hand, both sides have become entrenched in their positions. In dialogue with the United States and its allies, we will insist on the elaboration of specific agreements that would exclude any further NATO moves to the east and the deployment of weapons systems that threaten us close to Russian territory. That's Putin's red line. And this was Biden's response shortly before the video conference.
I won't accept anybody's red line.
I won't accept anyone's
Biden
red
has
line.
threatened stringent economic sanctions in conjunction with Western allies and has promised further military assistance for Kiev. How successful is U.S. support of Ukraine?
Well, let's take that question to Roman in Bonn. How successful, Roman, has the US been as an ally of Ukraine?
Well, very successful, I would say. We had a phase immediately after 2014, after the annexation.
Yeah, after the annexation of Crimea, we just started sending fucking cruise missiles over to them because the greatest strength of the Russian military is in their tanks. They have a fucking assload of tanks. They actually have more tanks than the US military does, all right? That's the main strength that they have. They can roll up on a fucking city and take it over way, way, way faster than most other countries in the world because of their armed cavalry. So how do you combat that? Well, you give whoever is going to be invaded by them a fuck-ass load of anti-tank missiles. Makes it really hard for you to invade the country that you're trying to invade, right? So that's what the U.S. has been doing in regards to Russia invading Ukraine. Just giving them fuckloads of missiles so that they can't roll their tanks up in there. And this is where the controversy with Donald Trump withholding aid to Ukraine for dirt on Biden during the election comes from. Because the aid that he was saying that he was trying to withhold was the missiles to keep the tanks from invading. You know, the tanks that are the huge part of the Russian military that everybody recognizes as their mainstay of power when it comes to invading places or like military power. Like, this is just, it's just bad. There's nothing that you can say to defend the actions of Trump in that situation.
Of Crimea, where U.S. was very reluctant under the Obama administration to support Ukraine militarily, I mean, to send weapons. When Trump came to power, this changed, and Ukraine became, for example, anti-tank missiles, Javelin, and rifles, some smaller weapons which are not offensive, and they are not dangerous for the Russian army or whatever, but it gave Ukraine a sense of support that it very much needed. At the moment, we are facing more of the same, so the United States will be delivering in the coming days more weapons to Ukraine, smaller weapons, smaller arms. But Ukraine, of course, would like to see more. Ukraine would like to have Patriot anti-aircraft missiles. And this is something that could worry Mr. Putin very much. So I don't think we will see it in the coming future.
It's interesting. I'm worried, Mr. Putin, you say. My feeling is a little bit, because, you know, the fundamental thing that's going on here is that Vladimir Putin senses that the West has very little answer to his power games, and that doubt is dominating the situation at the moment.
I totally agree. And I think what Roman said, that Putin might be worried, I don't perceive it as negative. I think it's good if Putin would be worried, to be honest. The problem is... Oh, go further, please.
I beg to differ in that point, because I think it's no use to have a worried or even Russia who fears or has reason to fear an attack, which is, of course, utter nonsense, because NATO isn't going to invade Russia. But this feeling, or conveying this feeling of fear...
Yeah, I do also love the cry bully shit that Putin likes to do. Oh, well, we're scared that Ukraine is going to invade us, right? Why the fuck would Ukraine invade Russia? They're in the middle of a fucking civil war right now. They're in the middle of a fucking civil war right now. They have fucking pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine constantly violating the terms of a fucking peace agreement. Why the fuck would anybody invade the country that is already paying separatists to fight in the first country that we're talking about? The first country there is absolutely fucked. They have no choice but to just defend themselves against the people that are attacking them at home, right?
Is something you don't want with someone who has a nuclear arsenal and who is more or less on your doorstep. And as much as I can understand Russia saying, we don't want any rockets or some kind of weapon that can reach Moscow, on the other hand, I'm living in Berlin. I don't want any Russian artillery, rockets, missiles that can reach Berlin within short notice as those based in Kaliningrad. So if you see the Russian arguments, you might put on the table the same arguments from the Western side.
And it's important, if I may add that, we must be very clear that we have somebody who started and somebody who reacts. And in case of NATO in Eastern Europe, it's simply a fact that in 2014, Russia annexed Crimea and started the war in Eastern Ukraine. And as a reaction, the NATO put its troops on a rotation basis into Eastern Europe.
But the big question, I mean, is Biden, are the Americans ultimately willing to go to war, to adopt a military position to undertake?
They are not, but that's not necessary. I think the solution or the proposal, and what Biden said these days during the video conference, that he made very clear that the costs for Russia, if he would invade Ukraine again right now, the costs would be high.
OK, Moscow has a large force on its border with Ukraine, and the Russian side insists that it's only there to defend Russian territory at a time when tensions in Europe are, as Moscow puts it, off the scale.
The military units deployed again by Moscow in the past few weeks look menacing. According to the Secret Service, they're comprised of as many as 100,000 soldiers, tanks, and artillery. In eastern Ukraine, Russia-backed separatists and the Ukrainian army have been battling for control of the region. The conflict hasn't been resolved, despite efforts from the international community. Due to the recent deployment of troops, some in Ukraine fear the worst. Our intelligence service analyzes all scenarios, including the worst ones. It notes that a probability of a large-scale escalation on the part of Russia exists. The most probable time when Russia will be ready for the escalation is end of January. Ukraine reacted with military drills in the border region. And NATO...
That is not a lot of time. Holy shit. The end of January? The end of January is not a very good timetable when it comes to trying to bring Ukraine into the either the EU or NATO. I'm pretty sure that it's a pretty difficult and lengthy process. I don't know if you can fast track someone, but any kind of fast tracking action that brings Ukraine into some sort of alliance with the EU and America in general is a action that I would support.
NATO made a show of force as well, with warship maneuvers in the Black Sea and the Baltic. The threatening posturing continues. Will Putin risk war?
Good question.
I'd like to go back to Roman in Bonn and turn that question around a little bit and just ask, why is Ukraine in the first place so very important for Vladimir Putin? There's more than just strategic considerations at play here.
Well, Putin and the Russian elite and maybe large parts of the Russian society, but mostly Putin himself and people around him are kind of obsessed with Ukraine. And this just hasn't started yesterday or 2 years ago. It's a long story because they see Ukraine as a kind of a crown jewel in the Russian Empire they're trying to rebuild or renew. And there is no way they are going to accept Ukraine going away to the West. So we have to bear that in mind when we see the situation unfolding. And Putin just described it once again in a very detailed article he wrote this summer, where he said that Ukrainians and Russians are one people, which was divided after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And he says we want to be friends, and actually we shouldn't be fighting each other. Yes, but one thing is very important, which he says. He says Ukraine should be friendly to Russia. What he doesn't say, but what he implies is if it's not friendly to Russia, then it shouldn't exist at all. And this is very dangerous, I think, because Russia is ready to do things that no one considered are possible just a few years ago. Now everything is possible. But for the moment, this escalation that we see, my point is just...
One of the reasons that it's possible now is the constant affirmation that the Trump administration gave to actions by the Russian military and by Putin. It was like nearly uncritical. I don't think that Trump was a Russian agent or anything. I think that he just respects strong men because he's a very weak man and he wants to be perceived as strong. So he hangs out with the strong men. So when we look at the way that he was friends with Kim Jong-un, not Kim Jong-il, I think it's Kim Jong-un, the way that he was friends with Xi Jinping, he wants to be surrounded by people that are mighty and strong leaders of their nation, right? And he constantly attacked people that were the leaders of nations that we are allies with. So I do think that the lack of action on Trump's part and the Trump administration's part to try and rein Russia in and the tacit endorsement of almost anything that they did was one reason why Putin was able to gain this amount of power. Maybe not fully, but at least in part.
An instrument to put pressure on the West and to force the West to start talking to Russia about security in Europe and especially weapons in Ukraine and around Ukraine.
I would like to add something. One point why Russia looks very closely to Ukraine and wants to destabilize it. I think the point is that he wants to prevent Ukraine to be a successful democratic state, as Russia
Putin
is an
hates
autocratic system.
democracy.
And remember, please, Putin talking about the so-called colored revolutions in several countries, also in Eastern Europe. And don't forget about Maidan, which was the starting point for all this bigger crisis between Russia and Ukraine. So Putin doesn't want democratization in his neighborhood, and especially in Ukraine, that is so much similar to Russia from the size and so on, and from the structure. He doesn't want this country to succeed in democracy. Because it could show...
That's a very important point. Yeah, it's a very important point. Ukrainians should not live better than the Russians. and they should not be a democratic Russia. And this is very important for Putin. He's ready to do anything he can to prevent it.
Thomas?
Well, I'd like to broaden the scope a little bit. It's way beyond Ukraine, I think. When Putin is mentioning red lines, when he's demanding treaties, guarantees, we have to keep in mind that there are already treaties, that such negotiations have taken place, that some kind of legal framework exists. Just to mention the OSCE, which Russia is a member of, but nevertheless, those monitors of OSCE in Ukraine have no real possibilities to monitor. On the other hand, there is the Nato-Russia Founding Act, which gives a legal framework for relations between NATO and Russia, which defines things both parts would do or not do, like NATO agreed not to base substantial combat troops in the former East Bloc, not to base nuclear weapons in the former East Bloc. So we have these legal...
Hold on. We have a Kremlin apologist in chat? Who? Wasn't Crimea annexed before Trump? Yo, so yeah, Obama's administration was pretty tough on Russia. I mean, we didn't go to war to defend Crimea, right? But we put sanctions on Russia super fucking hard under Obama. Their economy was like fucked under the Obama presidency because of the really, really harsh sanctions that we and a couple of other nations put on them. Yeah, I don't know what you mean. Obama wasn't tough on Putin. Crimea allegedly voted to join Russia. Yeah, 98% or something like that. Some like ungodly number of people voted to join the Russian Federation. I simply do not fucking believe it. If you're going to tell me that like overnight people went from like 30% to 90% approval to join Russia,
legally binding guarantees Putin is demanding already in place.
We've got the legally binding guarantees that you're talking about, and we've got a very passionate Vladimir Putin who has an obsession with.
Hold on, you guys are mega coping. He didn't just get tough on Russia in the last 3 weeks of his term. No, that's just fucking wrong. I don't know why the fuck you would get that idea in your head. Like the entirety of the Obama presidency was pretty anti-Russian. I don't know why you would think that. I think that we did one good thing with Russia during that time. And you know what? Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm like 90% sure that Obama was pretty explicitly against Putin's constant fucking aggression against other nations and their like poisoning of journalists and shit. Like this is like, I don't know how anyone would argue against that when it's just fucking true. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Obama was pretty rough on Russia. He wasn't a Putin friend. And that's why when Hillary was running in 2016, because she was the Secretary of State under Obama, Russia was like really not into the idea of a Hillary presidency, you know? Obama literally did a coup in Russian allied Ukraine. What are you talking about? They had a civil war, dog. Do you have any proof that shows that like the US went in there and did a coup or color revolution? Oh, okay. Yeah. So like any action, anybody that like doesn't like Russia is just like a color revolutionary or a fucking CIA activist that's going in and trying to sow discord and trying to like play games with the international community. But when Russia goes in and starts invading places, well, like obviously he has a reason to be doing that sort of thing. Ukraine is trying to fight against Russia. Fuck it. Well, no, it's not even a Wikipedia time. That's just like wild speculation that has no basis in reality or any kind of proof that they could put forward past speculation. It's unbelievable why people will like how people will like do this thing where they're like, oh yeah, this is like 100% what happened, right? They'll say that this is 100% what happened. Yeah, like don't even fucking worry about it. Why would you worry about it? Like we know that this is a color revolution. We know that this is just like CIA propaganda. Like How do you know if it's CIA propaganda? If it's just like all CIA actions, how the fuck do you think that you're smart enough to see through it? Why wouldn't, like, if it was the CIA, don't you think that they might be a little bit more clever than like these Saturday morning cartoon villains that are constantly going around and doing coups all over the fucking world with no one calling them on it or being able to like see through? Like, if they were these ultra nefarious people, you think that maybe someone would see through it and like find evidence, right? But it's always just like, well, obviously they have ways of being having plausible deniability. But then you look at someone like fucking Vladimir Putin, who actually is doing things like poisoning fucking reporters and shit constantly, poisoning political dissidents constantly. And oh, well, yeah, you have no fucking proof that was Putin. It was obviously the CIA. These people look at the CIA like the fucking not like the neo-Nazis and the fucking Groypers and all these white nationalists look at the Jewish population of the world. Oh, well, yeah, the Jewish population of the world just has this ultra fucking hidden cabal that like we can see through, but the rest of the world hasn't been able to see through. It's about natural gas, dude. Oh, it's always about natural gas. It's always about oil fields and shit. Fucking cope harder, Myelin. This is unbelievable how people will do this. How do we free the people of Russia and China? I don't think that we can like go through and free the people of Russia and China. They're going to have to do that themselves, but we can damn sure make sure that the governments of Russia and China don't go through and just like invade or like turn into indentured servants other countries. God fucking damn.
With Ukraine, which of those two aspects of the story of history is going to win out?
Well, I think it's too early to tell, but at the moment, Putin is testing the resolve of the West and the resolve of NATO.
Would Vladimir Putin risk a major invasion if that were the only way to see his vision, his historic vision realized?
I'm really not sure. Well, he is aware of the consequences, which need not be military, and I don't think Biden said combat troops, U.S. combat troops, are not on the table. So it won't be a military response. It will be a response on many other fields, which might hurt Russia as well.
What is Germany? Is the EU? We've got a new government coming in here in Germany. Is the EU playing this game the right way with Vladimir Putin at this point in time? I mean, there are issues about energy policy, for example, where very many outside observers say that the EU and especially Germany has effectively shot itself in the foot.
Yeah, exactly. But I think I'm a bit optimistic now because I think things are getting better, and the main task is unity within European Union and also between European Union, NATO members, and the US. And we have positive signs because still this week, I guess, will be also a video call that shall include also the heads of states of eastern states, which are closer to Russia, and I think this is a very good sign of unity. And of course, Ukraine should also be involved.
Roman, what advice would you have for the new German foreign minister, who's now in her first week in office? What would your advice for her be on the Ukraine-Russia story?
Well, I would advise her to travel to Kiev as soon as possible. She's traveling to European capitals now. I think Kiev should be on the list maybe by the end of this year. It would be a very strong signal. And this is something that I miss, actually. We hear a lot of words of support for Ukraine from Western leaders, from German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and maybe we'll hear them from the new Chancellor Olaf Scholz. But I think a personal presence of a Western high-rank politician in Kiev would be...
Really quick. I think the CIA is cool, but be real. Okay, my friend, do you think that any other country does like? Do you think that the U.S. is going around and doing all these things exclusively? Even if I was to grant you that this it was absolutely a color revolution, or that it was the CIA that went through, do you think that Russia isn't also doing shit to us to try and fuck over the U.S. constantly? I'm genuinely curious. Do you think that the U.S. is just uniquely bad? And they're going through and they're just like meddling in everybody else's affairs and nobody else is doing anything fucking bad all over the fucking world, like even to the U.S.? I need an answer. I need to know. It is well documented that Russia and China have been doing cyber attacks against us. It's well documented that they have been especially Russia, has been destabilizing democracies in the West all over the fucking place. I'm just saying at the time it was us. No, I outside of empirical evidence that this is happening, I refuse to accept anything like that. It's such a fucking weird cope to do, to say like this is the CIA when there was serious debate in Ukraine at the time whether or not to stay to ally with Russia or to join the EU. But we were pretty conspiratorial and shady as hell. Look at I don't know Timber Sycamore if you want to shoot me a link or something, but like I don't think that we staged a coup anywhere. I don't like in recent history, right? I don't think that we stage a coup in Egypt and Syria. Like Syria was part of the fucking Arab Spring, where a bunch of countries all over the Middle East were rising up against their dictatorships, right? That had nothing to do with the U.S. The U.S. stepped in and tried to like intervene where there was pretty egregious human rights violations, but
a very good signal of support to Ukraine, because Ukraine is having already enough military support. It is having enough, I think, financial support and political support. What it needs is a few symbols. And once again, my very...
Hold on. I love this. No, that's a perfect statement, Myelin. Please, draw a direct line. The guy that armed Al-Qaeda in Syria wouldn't do a coup in Ukraine. Draw a direct line between those two statements. Can you do that? Can you draw a direct line between arming Al-Qaeda in Syria and doing a coup in Ukraine? I don't even know if that first part is true, but I just want to see. Where's the logical through line there? I'll fucking sit here and wait for it. I'm so fucking interested how those two things line up together. Iran-Contra? What about Iran-Contra? We're talking about Ukraine, Syria, Russia, US, and Western NATO nations and EU nations right now. Both are not respecting the sovereignty of Russian allies. Okay, interesting. So when Russia or Russia arms Iran, or Russia arms or gives funding to terrorist groups that go against U.S. interests in the Middle East, is that or against allies that the U.S. has in the Middle East, is that Russia doing something bad too? Like I'm just like I don't know how you can go from the U.S. is trying to arm people in Syria, where we have vested interests, where people are attacking our allies, namely the Kurds, who are being fucking slaughtered and genocided by different ethnic groups in different countries in that area, right? Draw me a distinction where like we're not protecting our interest or like saving people's lives doing that. It's such a fucking one-dimensional worldview. It's so fucking cringe. Holy fuck.
Very important idea, I think, is to think strategically and long term. What will become of Ukraine in 5 or 10 years? When we find the answer to that question, we will solve the problem.
Thomas Wiegold, your advice to the incoming German government?
Well, it's difficult at this point in time. I think, yeah, a firm stand on Russia. I think that's the most important point. And as Roman said, going to Kiev might be a sign. We had the now Vice-Chancellor who advised a few months ago during the election campaign, how about defensive weapons from Germany for Ukraine? We'll see if this...
Robert Habeck, a senior minister of the German government.
Exactly, he suggested this.
He has renewed that position as well in recent days.
But I think within his own party, that's really a problem. And we'll see what comes out of it.
What would you say, Gesine? What's your advice to the German government, to the incoming German foreign minister?
I think at first, as my colleague said, a clear position and unity, and to agree their positions and policies with the other members of EU. But at the same time, the German government and also the EU should keep on working on the ground and not forget about the situation we have already in Donbass. There is war ongoing, and there is lots to be done in increasing small steps forward, like prisoners exchange and dialogue between people on both sides of the contact line and things like that. We are talking about geopolitics, and we should not forget about the people.
Very important point. One of the let's go to Roman because I mean I know that you are from a generation that grew up in the shadow of war. How much does that influence your thinking and your perceptions at this point in time?
You mean in the shadow of Cold War, or you mean
the shadow of a possible war?
Of a possible war, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, let me say like this. 10 or 15 years ago, I was sure there would be a war between Russia and Ukraine if Ukraine joins NATO. I think it was clear at that time. And so I was not surprised in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea. I was just surprised at the timing. So I think we might, we should be looking, what can we...
Roman, I'm very sorry. We're going to have to leave it there. Very sorry. Thanks for joining us from Bonn. We've been talking about the Ukraine-Russia crisis. Yeah, if you've enjoyed the show as much as I have, come back next time round. Until then, bye-bye and cheers.
Their music is so fucking interesting. Holy shit. Interesting. So yeah, what needs to be done ultimately is to try and protect the sovereignty of Ukraine. It's not like the US is trying to invade anybody right here. We're trying to protect democracy abroad. And if Russia is trying to stand in the way of, you know, allowing any Western democracy to survive or flourish or anything along those lines, I think that we're well within our rights to defend people who we are allied with or have good relations with, in order to protect our interests and their interests against the, you know, imposition of dictatorship by a foreign fucking leader who does not care about democracy whatsoever and actively flaunts his lack of care about democracy in front of everybody constantly. All right. And I don't think that should be a hot take, even amongst the left in the United States. Even if you're against war, you have to recognize that sometimes war is something that needs to happen in order to make sure that people are kept safe, like civilians are kept safe. And I also think that something that we should take out of this is not to fucking be conspiratorial as fuck. Oh, man. I mean, we don't want war. That's something that we always want to try and avoid, but we're also not going to shy away from defending our interests against a leader that is actively trying to undermine our democracy, right? Does anybody disagree with that in this chat whatsoever? Does anybody disagree with me that if someone's trying to fucking insert themselves into our democracy or into democracies of our allies, that we shouldn't be able to protect our and our allies' interests? Is it about our democracy or Ukraine's democracy? It's about both of our democracies. So it's about Ukraine's democracy directly because their democracy is directly being threatened by invasion by the fucking Russian government. And then it's about our democracy because the more power that Putin gains, the more likely he's going to be able to fucking, you know, insert himself into our fucking electoral system by, sorry, the music just got loud and now I can't fucking think. It's going to protect our interests because Putin won't be able to have as much power as he might if he were to invade Ukraine. It's an expansion of his power, and his power is being used to unseat democracy abroad.
In order to understand the Azov Battalion and what's going on in Ukraine, we go back to 2014, right? There was a right-wing US-backed coup, a viciously right-wing coup against a Russia-leaning government. It's often referred to as pro-Russian, but really
Russia-curious.
Russia-curious. I mean, really it was not an anti-Russian government, which to the US means they're pro-Russian. So in 2014, there's this so-called government. It's often referred to as pro-Russian, but really
Russia-curious.
Russia-curious. I mean, really it was not an anti-Russian government, which to the US means they're pro-Russian. So in 2014, there's this so-called revolution.
Is this gray zone? Yeah, this is the gray zone. The gray zone is is one of those things that you should never fucking listen to, fucking ever. The gray zone is such a shit piece of, or a shit place for discourse, for any kind of information. There's like absolutely no reason why you should ever listen to them. it's so obviously slanted in one direction, and that one direction is anything that goes against the U.S. is good, and everything that the U.S. does is bad. Even when the U.S. does a good thing, like try to defend democracy. And I'm not saying like defend democracy and like use that as an excuse to invade someplace like we did with Iraq. I'm talking about like an actually good defensive democracy, like not allowing Ukraine to be invaded and have their sovereignty challenged. Like that's the kind of shit that I'm talking about, you know?
Revolutionary movement they call Maidan, right? Euromaidan. And in this coup attempt, not just attempt, this actual coup that overthrew the elected government, far-right neo-Nazi groups played a major role. And there were parties like Svoboda and also the right sector that played a key role in this coup attempt, this actual coup. And then after the coup, during the coup and after the coup, there were these neo-Nazi militias that were allied with some of the neo-Nazi far-right parties that merged. And Azov was one of the major neo-Nazi.
So from what I understand, there are a bunch of different groups that are fighting inside of the Ukraine civil war. And Ukraine has a tenuous fucking relationship with like super far right militias because the Russian separatists, like the group that is being paid for by, like being funded by Russia to destabilize Ukraine, is much better funded and much better equipped than the Ukrainian government is by itself. So they have a tenuous relationship with other like individual militias, and some of those are far right, but that doesn't mean that they are themselves like neo-Nazi fucking Ukrainians. Like that's an incredibly weird thing to say right there.
See explicit neo-Nazi militias. And then there's also groups like C14. C14, which is another neo-Nazi militia that has been carrying out, people might have seen pogroms against the Romani population. Actually, I wrote another article, The Gray Zone, about how a member of this neo-Nazi militia, C14, spoke at the America House in Ukraine, which is basically an arm of the US government. An actual member of this neo-Nazi group, that their name C14, 14 comes from the 14 words, which is a white supremacist slogan about how they will not replace us, whatever, white people are the best, whatever. So another neo-Nazi militia that became more and more prominent after the 2014 anti-Russian coup is the Azov Battalion. And the Azov Battalion, after the coup, merged directly with the Ukrainian National Guard. It was incorporated into the Ukrainian National Guard. And now the Azov Battalion still exists as an independent structure, but it's part of the Ukrainian state. So you have an explicit neo-Nazi militia that is working with the Ukrainian National Guard, which is also trained and armed by the U.S. government. The U.S. military trains and arms the National Guard. So there are photos in 2017. This is not from back in 2014. This is 2 years ago. In 2017, the Azov Battalion posted on its official website photos of American and also Canadian military officials meeting with leaders of the Azov Battalion and giving them military training and advice and talking about how they can work.
Because they're trying to fucking fight against Russian separatists. It's a fucking civil war where there's multiple actors, kind of like the Syrian war, where there's like fucking 3 separate wars going on within the Syrian civil war. One side that's being funded by the US and its allies, Syria and Russia, and then like Iran having its own interests being expressed there. In Saudi Arabia having its, so maybe there's like a 4 or 5 way, like, shit show going on in Syria during the civil war. But like none of this speaks to the fact that all of the people that are acting in these situations are trying to defend their interests and the interests of like people that are allied with them, right? Like I don't even know what there is to debunk here. They're just like they're giving information and they're skewing it in a very, 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 very specific way, right? Yeah, anyone that has any kind of affiliation with the Gray Zone or any affiliation with RT is like, that's major fucking red flags immediately, okay?